when emotion goes up, the rational way of dealing with things gets thrown out the door. So one of the most challenging things to do is to apply it when you're actually experiencing some level of emotion.
Welcome to the Master Dealmaker's Secrets podcast. And now, here's sales growth strategist, John Blake.
Welcome to Master Dealmaker's Secrets. This is episode 207, and I am really pumped to have Lloyd Thompson back on with me. The last episode that we did was so much fun, and we had a really good response to it. And so we came up with another idea to talk again about books, but this time we are going to talk about the 3 books that have changed our lives. So I'm really excited to share these 3 books. They truly have. I mean, I've read a lot of books, so a book really does need to stack up to change my life because I've read so many of them. I'm excited to share what my 3 are, and Lloyd has got a couple of rippers as well. And one of the books that we talked about, we actually had in common. So that was pretty cool because it's not like we compared notes in the lead up to today. So that's cool. So we'll have a lot to say about one of the books for sure. But Lloyd, given that you're the guest, I'll let you go first.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, John. Good to be here again. Okay, well, I'm going to start with a story about how I got to this book. I would have been 22, 23, and I was on the train from London, where I worked, to Southampton by the coast where my girlfriend lived. And I just sat down opposite this stranger, and he was an older moustached gentleman sitting there reading his book about retro propeller planes. And as I sat down, he said to me, I was wondering when you were going to turn up. He's just having a joke. And I said to him, I suppose you've got one of those planes, or I hope you've got one of those planes. And he turns to one of the pages and he says, yeah, this one. So this started a big conversation. I've just got talking with this stranger, and we're off to a good start. And it turned out...
Who was expecting you?
Who's this person who's just going to sit down opposite me? When was this person going to turn up? Just having a bit of British banter, which I enjoyed very much so. And he said, it turns out that he was a business owner, and he was an ex-surgeon, and he did medical advice. And so we had a long chat about that. And then meanwhile, in my life, just to paint my picture, I was 22, 23. I was working in corporate and consulting, and I was working on the second biggest IT project in the country. Not getting paid very much. It was entry-level consulting for me, although it was a great job. And I'd also started interviewing around because I was like, it was very hard to live in London as a 22, 23-year-old on those kind of rates. And I'd got offered a job that was literally twice the salary, which was not bad after 18 months out of university. And so the question on my mind was, how do I go back to my existing job and not just tell them, but maybe even just, do I even ask them? Can you even match this? It's a significant position. It's a significant ask. So I thought, well, why don't I just ask my new friend? So I asked my new friend who was on the train, and I said, hey, I've got this situation. What do you think? Anyway, he directed me to a book, and he said, so this book is called The Aladdin Factor, and it's by Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen. And basically the premise of this book is, if ever there was a question that you could have asked, and the only thing you'd have got, the only downside was a no, but all to gain for a yes, then why don't you ask it? And then it goes through a whole load of scenarios about how to ask difficult questions. And actually, I talked about this book to my Brazilian friend. He said, yeah, there's an expression we have in Brazil called, you already have the no. So you've got the no, why don't you try for a yes? And so one of the formulas in this book is about sort of stating your concern up front, if you like, and saying, I thought you might think less of me if I brought this topic to light, but these are the things on my mind, and these are why I'm asking you X, Y, Z. So anyway, I went back to my employer. I said, can you match my offer? And they basically said, no chance, not at all. But this book made me very comfortable with rejection from the get-go. it just opened my mind to that concept of just asking questions. If there's nothing to lose, go for it. And so that is my first absolute mindset shifting book.
It's so true. And it can apply to so many different areas. It can apply to the conversation, the scenario that you just talked about, which is being given another offer. Should I go back to my existing boss and ask him if he can match it? Right? There's that. But then it might be, it might come down to like you might want to test a marketing post, or you might want to test an email. So at the moment, I'm in the process of filling the last remaining spots in my sales mastery certification. By the time this episode goes to air, I will have hopefully already filled those spots. But, every time an email goes out, it's the same thing. It's like, wow, are people going to respond to this?
Yeah, there's vulnerability in what we do, isn't there? You just have to put yourself out there.
Are people going to like this? Is it going to make them mad? There's all of that. So just having being able to ask is so important. And I loved also what you said. You already have the no.
Yeah.
I've heard it a number of times. It's like, if you don't ask, the answer's no.
Yeah.
So yeah, you already have the no. I love that. It's effectively the same thing.
Such a short, nice, punchy way of putting it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, mate, that's awesome. Love that. What's number 2?
Oh, we're going straight to my number 2, right?
Oh, hang on. No, that's right.
Let's go to you. Let's have your number 1.
We're going book for book. I couldn't remember what we did last time. Anyway. Okay, so my first one also has a story attached to it. So I must have been about 12 or 13. And I'd had a couple of girlfriends, and it had been relatively, I guess, a normal thing, as just started dating. And I went out with this one particular girl, and I wasn't with her for very long. I was probably only with her for, what seemed like maybe only 3 weeks, like a maximum of a month. But I just fell particularly hard for her. You know what I mean? Oh. And it's not like, I was like 12, 13 years old. It's not like we, had this incredibly, passionate, relationship, where there was all of this, physical contact and stuff. There was, I was like 12 years old. There's like hardly any of that going on at all, But she ended it, and she kind of ended it, I guess she ended it in a way that I thought was fairly insensitive, but I was absolutely destroyed.
Wow.
Like I was just a shell. And I remembered thinking at the time, like, this is horrible. Like, this is the worst feeling ever. You know what I mean? It's like, like I had fallen and I hadn't even really gotten that much out of it.
1 month in, I'll never be in love again.
I know, right? I just couldn't believe it. It was like, wow, I've been with a couple of different girls, but just this one, it was like, it absolutely destroyed me. And I remembered thinking, I don't want to ever feel like this ever again. I just had this, there must be a way. This is just over the top. Like there's, there must be a way that I can avoid this happening to me ever again. And that was my thinking, right? And my mum at the time was in a book club, and every month we'd get a book and she'd read it, and so I was looking through her bookshelf, and I came across this book. I'm like 12 years old, called Your Erroneous Zones by and not to be confused with Your Erogenous Zones. I think what you just did there.
I think that's right? What I did, and I'm embarrassed now. Right. Cut.
Yeah. But a lot of people do that, right? So it's your erroneous zones, right? And it's by an author called Wayne Dyer. And Wayne Dyer, most people would have heard of. He was one of the earliest pioneers of self-help.
Wow.
And so this book, Your Erroneous Zones, literally changed my life, because and in it, so he talks about erroneous zones as erroneous thinking. So the definition of erroneous is inaccurate or flawed, flawed type thinking. So he talks about your erroneous zones, and effectively what they are the negative emotions. So they're guilt, worry, jealousy, anxiety, all of those negative type, nervousness, apprehend, all of those negative type emotions that we experience at different times of our life. But of course, the one that I went straight to, which was, how do I not feel this horrible feeling after breaking up with someone? And so I read it, and then I just devoured it. I read it, and I was equipped with, and then, future relationships, I was just able to process the emotional side of it so much better. And I wish today that it was required reading for kids at school, because, they have this, they go through this transition in their life where they start to date people, and some of them experience that horrible breakup feeling, that horrible, disconnection of someone that you've fallen in love with, and they never recover from it, because they don't have the mental toolbox to be able to do it. And if I was to give it an analogy, I would say that that's what it is. It's like a mental toolbox to avoid experiencing, deep negative,
that's wonderful.
Guilt, worry, anxiety, jealousy, and so and that was really what started my path into what I do today. Because I started to read more of that sort of stuff, and stuff by Mark Victor Hansen, and one of the other books, which we won't mention yet because we've got just the same one. But that was pretty much what got me into what effectively what I do today. But the other point that I make is that my brother tried to read it when he was 12, and he just said to me, goes, I can't believe you read that book when you were 12. Like, he still spins out about it. He goes, I can't believe that you read that book and you got it at the age of 12. He said, I read that book. I picked that book up at the age of 12 and read about 2 pages and went, nah. and then he said, and then he said, and then I picked it up again when I was about 15 and went, yeah, nah. And then I picked it up again when I was about 9, because he just couldn't get his head around it. He just couldn't digest it. He just didn't have the, and I'm not saying that to make me look better or anything. It was just that he just spun out that I had the ability to be able to internalize everything that Dyer was talking about.
No, I haven't read the book, but I can imagine it requires a lot of introspection in order to process what it's suggesting.
So there's that one, and then he wrote this other one called Pulling Your Own Strings, which is about how not to get manipulated by other people's, especially people that that are close to you.
I'm inclined to read that first one, not to be confused with your erogenous zones.
Yeah, yeah. We'll need to be very careful when we tag that in the social posts. Yeah, not to be confused with your erogenous zones. So he talks about erroneous thinking, and he talks about at any point where you are demobilized, where you are demobilized by a particular event, that is that you are stuck in one of these erroneous zones. So
it reminds me a lot of,
that's my first
a YouTube video, and I'm trying to remember the name of the guy now, but he was one of the top business heads at, was it Facebook? Oh, it's dying to kill them. I'm trying to remember the name of it now, but he basically talked about something in his toolbox which he used when he got something that really made him angry or annoyed or just something how to diffuse a situation, and he'd always say, well, first thing is it true? Okay, let's say it is true. Can I do anything about it? Okay, if I can't, can I accept it? And I reflected on that. I'm like, okay, I've got those three. That's gold, straight in the toolbox. Wonderful thing.
Yeah, so good. So good. Yeah.
All right, shall I go with? Oh, sorry, you go.
Well, no, I was just gonna add one last thing. This is, one of the most useful things is like there's 2 days I don't worry about: yesterday and tomorrow.
Yeah, stay in the present. Yeah, wonderful.
Because I can't do anything about yesterday because that's done. Those moments are past, and I actually can't do anything about tomorrow either.
Yeah,
because we're not there yet. I can potentially mitigate what might go wrong. But then there's that whole fear setting thing that that Tim Ferriss talks about, which is what's the worst thing that can happen. And I've read it elsewhere as well, but what's the worst thing that can happen? Okay, is that likely to happen?
Yeah,
probably not. What can I do in between now and then to reduce the possibility of that happening? So like, if that worst thing happens, will I be okay? Would that be good? No, but would I be able to deal with it? Yeah. What would I do? I'd do this, and I'd do this to deal with that. Is that likely to happen? Probably not. What can I do to stop that happening? Well, I can do this, and this in the meantime, and that's a good way to sort of get rid of some of that.
The thing that all of these have in common is that, for me anyway, the mind can sometimes come to you with an irrational fear, that voice. And then you're trying to just rationally sort of go, hang on a minute. And there's an expression, the mind is a terrible master and a great servant. And it's like, if you just let it control you, you're going to go down some weird path. But if you get in on top of it and go, hang on a minute, this is bullshit.
Totally.
This doesn't stack up. This is an irrational fear. It's not likely to happen. Yeah, I totally get that.
Yeah, and leading on from that, like I trained my brain, to think in certain ways, to a point where that book by Eckhart Tolle came out, and I started reading it, and I went, nah. He's the letting go guy. His is all about the stillness and spirituality, but like I said, I started reading his book. But his is about not trying to control. Yeah. So I started reading his book. I'm like, nah, no way in the world. I'm too far gone. I'm too far gone in my way of dealing with shit. There's no way in the world I can change direction now. So, yeah. All right, your turn. Book 2.
Number 2. So this one's going to be a quick one. And this one actually was recommended to me by the same guy on the train. So, and it's amazing that the influence of one person. And this one's not so much in the vein of general mindset. This is more business mindset, but it had an impact on me at the age of 22, 23. It stuck with me. And so this book is Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And with a title like that, it sounds like a kid's book. And in fact, I'd actually encourage many young people to read that book. But when I read this book, it gave me, I should go back and sort of paint a bit of a picture of what it's about. So Robert Kiyosaki is talking about, he's got his biological father, who was, I think, a professor, an academic. And then he had like a mentor, which he called his rich dad. So that was where the book came from. And so when he's talking about his rich dad and his poor dad, he's talking about the difference in mindset they had about things. And they're like, for example, rich dad was very much focused on the importance of financial education, whereas poor dad would be someone with a job, reasonably good job, but would be in like a scarcity mindset, where the rich dad was more abundance or opportunity mindset. So those kind of things. And the mindset of buying assets like property as opposed to buying liabilities like a car that's not so your average car that's not likely to appreciate in value. And then the final piece, which I think of every time I think of that book, was as a square, a quadrant, and it was called the cash flow quadrant. And it said, well, most of the people are in the top left, that's E for employed, like most people in the world, and that's very much that security focused, place where you're going to work hard, but it's going to be stable. Well, you hope so. So that's where most people sit. And then the next place is self-employed, and you're probably going to make more money. But then if you're self-employed, the phone's probably never stopping ringing. And so he talks about how the different lifestyles for these different places. That's the top half of the quadrant. And he goes into the bottom half and he says, well, bottom left, that business owner. This is kind of a good place to end up. So if you do it well, you're able to eventually delegate a lot of the work. And I say if you do it well, because I work with a lot of business owners who are needing our services to help them to, delegate a lot of that work. And then finally, the ultimate place he describes in this quadrant is investor. To be an investor, and it might have been that you started off as a business owner and then you became an investor with the funds from that business, or perhaps you've got to that mindset where you now invest in businesses. And so this, for me, was a really good mindset shift that I had early on. Even though I spent the first half of most of my career in corporate, I tried a few things to try. I really want to start a business. I tried and I failed and tried different things. And it was always there in my mind as something I always wanted to do. And it all goes back to reading that book and sort of seeing that perception about what really is important from the perspective of being a business owner and getting into that mindset.
Yeah, I remember reading that as well as a bunch of his other books, and then some of his advisors wrote books as well, and I read a bunch of them. But that was groundbreaking, I think. And Dan Kennedy talks about that book as having success that's attributed to a large extent by the simplicity of the story, because everybody, it was written in a sort of parable type format, and I think everyone could identify with the way that the majority of people have been brought up to think about wealth, which is get a job, work hard, then hopefully retire with enough money that is going to last before you do. That's going to outlast you. So yeah, it makes a bunch of sense. And it still stacks up. There's obviously been a bunch of things that have changed in terms of technology, but it still stacks up.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Dan Kennedy, because when I read that book, the modern book that I read by Dan Kennedy, which made me reflect back on that book, was Who Not How, which we mentioned in our last section.
Yeah.
Our last catch up was that Dan Kennedy or Dan Sullivan? Oh,
no, that was Dan Sullivan.
Okay. I've tripped over myself there. Okay, well, I'm going to say Who Not How was, thinking about who's going to do this for you rather than how am I going to do it myself. And I think that was something else that came out in Rich Dad Poor Dad, because he's saying there's always, if your mindset as the business owner is to think about, there's always going to be people who want work, and you as the business owner, you can be that person. So that was another concept. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, my second one is one that we talked about, but I think it stacks up in this context as well, which is nonviolent communication.
Great.
And I have, I talked about a couple of different examples of how I've been able to apply what I learned in that book, and that it's literally the only audio book that I've listened to more than 6 or 7 times. And every time I listen to it, I get something different out of it. And like even just as recently as, and the person involved is unlikely to listen to my podcast, so I think I can probably get away with it. But I wrote a particularly pointed post on LinkedIn, which just sort of fell out of me about a week or so ago on a Sunday morning. I just wrote it and I went, God, what am I going to do with that? And so I had this idea to post it on LinkedIn, and got into a couple of very it was a fairly brave subject to talk about, as it turns out.
I'm looking straight after this, John.
Yeah. And I had I had some particularly emotional, shall we say, or heated type exchanges with a number of people, and even just even replying to some of those comments, I was able to use the principles of nonviolent communication, to recognize, so that the person, rather than, because the typical argument online is so predictable. It's I've said this, and no, I don't agree with you, and then there's like usually a couple of relatively civil backwards and forwardses, and then someone gets someone starts to get angry, and they'll make some sort of an accusation or or have some sort of a cheap
it's a
shot.
judgment.
Yeah, broad sweeping statement, a classification, or apply a negative label to that person, even though they don't even know them.
Yeah.
And then from there, it's like, well, it's degenerated to pretty much an argument. And so I was able to avoid that happening on a couple of occasions just through using the principles in that book. Like I can,
Wow.
I can sense that that this is something that's deeply personal. I can see that that you're frustrated, and I wasn't saying that to use a tactic. I was saying that because I could genuinely see that was what was going on, and the response was so much more civil as a result. And again, it's the toolbox. There's the mental toolbox to how to deal with your emotions. Well, this is the verbal toolbox to be able to communicate in a way where, provided your intention is to, because your intention needs to be to avoid conflict or to avoid drama. So provided that's your intention, it's a verbal toolbox that allows you to be able to do that. And that's why, for me, it's a life-changing book.
I read that book based on your recommendation, and I loved it, and I'm still processing it now because it was only recently I finished it. And it reminded me of, there's a book, and now I'm on the spot, I can't remember the title of it, but it's by Chris Voss, who's the FBI negotiator guy, or former.
Never
FBI.
Split the Distance. Never
Yes,
Split the Difference.
That's the one. And it reminded me of one of his tips, is like, we hear the other side out first, play back everything they're saying, like really truly listen to them, and don't observe, and then you can make observations but not the judgments. You can talk about feelings, and then it talks about what a real feeling is. It's not it's like happy or sad. It's not, a lot of people, when they say I feel, and then they say something that's not actually a feeling, it's like
they say things like, I feel like you don't respect me.
Yeah.
Well,
that's
you
not
don't
a feeling.
You don't respect me is not a feeling.
Yeah.
Like the way to say that in a non-confusing way, or a non-violent communication way, would be, I feel angry because because when you talk to me, and he talks about meaningful specifics. So, I feel angry because when I have a conversation with you, or the last three conversations, so be specific, the last three conversations that I've had with you, you've walked away halfway through our conversation and refused to continue talking to me.
As opposed to saying, you always do something, which is a judgment or a label or something like that.
Yeah, it's a broad sweeping statement. Whereas I feel angry, so you're owning your own emotion. I feel angry because I.
Yeah, it's not you did this to me. It's not like you might have been the stimulus for my thoughts, but the thoughts came from me, and I'm owning that. And like I said, I'm still processing that book now, and it's at the point where I catch myself. I'm going, hang on, it's hard for me to immediately flip into non-violent communication mode and get it perfect.
Especially when emotion goes up, right?
Yeah.
When emotion goes up, the rational way of dealing with things gets thrown out the door. So one of the most challenging things to do is to apply it when you're actually experiencing some level of emotion, which may or may not happen from time to time with one's significant other.
Never. She's not going to listen to this.
No, of course not.
Actually, a light bulb moment from that book, right towards the end, actually, was he was talking about using non-violent communication with yourself. So
yes.
when we were talking about earlier, sometimes you get those irrational voice in your head, and where it might be saying, it would be terrible if this occurred or whatever, and then you're rationalizing it and go, oh, hang on a minute, really? Is that really true? Hang on a minute. It was saying, well, now you can use that rephrase, write down what the sentences are that you perceived in your mind. Now look at that really and say, what am I really needing here? Or what am I really saying here that's underlying this? So there was so much in that book, not just about communicating with others, but with yourself. So
yeah,
although I've only got through it once, I think it's going to get a few more plays yet.
Oh yeah, no, it'll take you a good 2 or 3 to even just to sort of start to get a handle on it. There's so much in it. But some of the examples are amazing. Like with the woman that thought she was going to get raped, and the couple that had been in counselling for 10 years and hadn't ever been able to reach a resolution, and through him just sitting there with them for an hour or two, like and his prediction, like after you can both express to me properly what your needs are, we'll have this resolved within 10 minutes.
20 minutes or something, yeah.
Yeah, 20 minutes. And he was dead on. Like, he was dead right. It was like, yeah.
But it just shows how hard it is to... It just shows how hard it is to express your needs clearly, doesn't it?
Yeah, because so much of the responses and the behaviours are baked, they just get baked on. So it's actually really hard to sort of chip them off and go, okay, what's really behind this? What am I really trying to say? And how are you really hearing me, as opposed to how I want to be perceived? It's that classic thing. The meaning of the communication is the response that you get. So you can say something. And have an intention, but the way that it gets perceived is in many ways out of your control. But then the thing I like about this book is that if you become more deliberate and mindful of the language that you use, the meaning of your communication can be more in line with your intention as you say it. That's the thing I love about it.
That's a great book, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a ripper.
Well, I'm excited about this next book because I know we've discovered that we both got this book on the list.
Yeah. Well, and I've got a slight twist on it as well, but over to you.
Okay. Well, before I say what the book is, I've got a bit of a story again. And when I work with customers, a lot of the time I ask them to do a vivid vision exercise.
Oh, yeah.
And this is a bit different from like just putting out your vision statement or your mission statement. This is a large descriptive document where you can use your creative brain. So this is not talking about specific numbers in your business or anything. You can talk about, what is it like to walk through the doors of my business in, say, 3 years' time? What's the culture? What do the customers say about us? What are the team like? What are they doing? What am I doing? And then what am I doing in my life? Like, how much do I engage with my business? What's my role? What's my lifestyle? Like, all of that. Like, how many meetings am I going to? What does good look like? Like, really, like, wave your magic wand. Like, what's the ideal situation? And the benefit of doing this is it's a great communication document to say to your team, like your senior folks, or everybody really, and say, look, this is where I want to get to. Like, help me get here. It's a really, really clear picture of exactly what we want to get to. And you can also use it to, you put your culture, your values in here, and you can use it to attract team and repel team who do not like this vision. And I've done this as well. And, for the notes here, it's at my website, virtualdo.com/vision. I've done this for myself. And I update it occasionally to get a clear view of, like, is this what I really want? And I've actually found that people who I've actually attracted customer interest from this, because they've gone, oh, these are your values, or this is what we like about it. We really like that heart and humor value about how you talk to your customers like a dear friend. We love that. This is the relationship we want. So this exercise, I've embraced that. And side story again, this Vivid Vision is there's a Cameron Herald book called Vivid Vision. I took it from there. It's brilliant. So endorse that. So this
I'm pretty sure I got that book. I'm pretty sure I've got it. It's
a simple concept, and I've just taken his vision and gone tweak. I see what you're doing here. You got section here, section here, section here. Go. I've just gone and just wrapped my whole picture. How do I want it to look like? And it's really clear for me. So why do I bring this up? You probably have a good clear view when I'm talking about the book I'm about to talk about. It's Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. And this book was written in, I think, the 60s. And Maxwell Maltz predates, he's like the Tony Robbins of the 60s, and he was like before Zig Ziglar and all of these folks that got into the mindset. And I don't know who inspired him, but his backstory was he was a plastic surgeon, and he was dealing with people who had come back from war who might have awful disfigurements. And he would be able to go to work on them. And in some cases, when they fixed whatever the cosmetic fix was, they would return to a feeling of feeling restored, and they would feel great. But for a great many people, the cosmetic work looked great, but then there was still somewhere where he couldn't get a handle on. There was still a problem there. And he come to realize that the problem was how they perceived themselves. And so the book at its root is about perception and visioning. And the techniques that he uses in this book are now used in modern day sports. So when we talk about athletes, when they're going to do the long jump or basketball, there's studies that show that if you think about shooting the hoop, think, oh, here I'm going to throw the hoop. This is how I'm going to throw it. That's where it's going to go. I'm a terrible basketball player. But there is a marked performance improvement as a result of visioning it. And the two techniques that he really and it's a huge book. There's so many things in there, but the two techniques that really, really I think about a lot are the two visioning techniques, where he's like, think about yourself as if you're in the theater and you're viewing yourself in the theater in the third person doing that thing, whatever that thing is that you want to improve. It might be being on stage doing a talk, like what are you wearing, how are you saying it, how are the crowd responding to you. Like, view it like that, and then you can play it back and edit it and refine it. That's one piece. And then the other piece was, and then play it back again through your own eyes, as if you're now, if it was sport, what did it look like from the outside when I threw that ball? How did it go? And then what did it look like when I actually shot it, and how I looked at it? And that has shown to improve performance. So that book really stuck with me, and there's a whole masterclass on how you view yourself in there. It's an absolute banger of a book, which I must have got through about 6 times now.
So good. So good. And he wrote another book called Zero Resistance Selling.
No way. I did not know that.
Yeah. So he wrote Psycho-Cybernetics, and then totally agree with you. Theater of the mind, watching your own performance from the third person, and then the other one is watching it all unfold in the first person, which I always liken to that film Being John Malkovich.
Wow, yeah.
Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, it's Cameron Diaz is in there as a very different character to what she normally plays.
Yeah, and it was just it was a fascinating film. But so I've used that personally. So I've used it. I've used it personally in some business type settings. I remembered doing that. I just used to sit in my car and do the visualization exercise before I went in to do a sales call, and I've had some amazing results doing that. But I also did it with a guy that I worked with, that I coached, and he was so to give you a bit of background, he was working for one of my clients who was selling sunglasses, and he was their worst performing rep. And these guys, as a bit of a Hail Mary, they said, look, can you go down to Victoria and go out on the road with this guy, right? So we're selling sunglasses. It's in the middle of winter, right? So you can imagine how interested retailers are about buying sunglasses right in the middle of winter in Victoria, right?
Yeah.
So I go down there and sure, like we've got a couple of, we had one, pretty sure we had a new frame in 3 new colors. We had a beanie and we had a hat. And so we did 3 calls that day. And the first call, I got him to sit in the car and go through the visualization exercise. But I got him to visualize a time, and I'm pretty sure this is in the book, visualize a time where he like won something. So this guy was a competitive windsurfer. And I said, have you ever won a windsurfing tournament? I said, yeah. And I said, would you consider that as a bit of a pinnacle for you in terms of your memories and your sense of achievement, all the rest of it? He said, yeah. And I said, okay, cool. So close your eyes. I said, visualize, where you were on or around when the presentation was taking place. He said, yeah. And I said, cool. So can you see what was going on that day? Can you visualize? Can you recall what was going on, just before the presentation? He said, yeah. I said, can you see what everyone was wearing? He said, yeah, absolutely. And I said, can you hear what was, some of the sounds and stuff? And he's like, yeah. And I said, can you, because he was a windsurfer, I said, can you remember can you recall which way the wind was coming from? And he said, yeah. And I said, can you feel the wind blowing against that particular side of your face? And he said, yeah. And I said, great. And I said, now, can you recall how you felt when they read your name out as the winner? And he said, yeah. And I said, can you remember what you saw? Yes. Can you remember what you heard? Yes. Can you remember how you felt? Yeah. And I said, great. I said, now what you to do is I want you to walk out of that scene straight into the scene that you're just about to go into with this retailer. And I want you to visualize exactly how many beanies they're buying, exactly how many sunglasses that they're buying, and exactly how many hats that they're buying. And I want you to visualize it all going well and writing the order and them, being receptive and smiling and laughing, all the rest of it. And so we did that before all three of those sales calls. And what he visualized in his head was exactly what he walked out with in terms of an order.
That is amazing.
And by the time we'd done the third call, he was so excited. Remember, this was their poorest performing rep. I didn't even go in with him. So it's not like, it was like, the guy from head office to influence what was going on. None of that. I sat in the car the whole day, and every time he walked out with exactly how much he had visualized selling. And by the end of the last call, he was so excited. I thought he was going to start doing nude backflips off the bonnet of the car. Like he was so pumped. He was so pumped. And I did the exact same exercise with Lockie the other day when he was playing footy over the road, because he plays Aussie rules, and he was having shots for goals, and he was missing them all. And I said, right, I got him to go through the exact same exercise, and I said, I'm going to go home now, and I said, tell me how many. I said, I want you to have 10 shots. I want you to go through this exercise before you do each shot. And I said, and I want you to tell me. So before, I think he kicked like maybe 3 or 4 out of 10. He came back and I said, how many? He goes, 8.
That's great, isn't it? Just shows that this stuff works.
Oh yeah. It's bizarre. So yeah, zero resistance selling was. I read that as well as Psycho-Cybernetics. But yeah, that's a brilliant book, and yeah, was absolutely in my top 3 as well.
Yeah, great. Wow.
Cool. All right, mate. Well, maybe just to recap. So your top 3 were Rich Dad, Poor Dad, The Aladdin Factor, and Psycho-Cybernetics. And my top 3 were Your Erroneous Zones by Wayne Dyer, Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, and Zero Resistance Selling / Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. And the author of The Aladdin Factor was Mark Victor Hansen, and the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad was Robert Kiyosaki.
That's it. Great.
Mate, as always, had a ball.
It.
Thanks for coming on.
Love to be here. Great having a chat.
Awesome, mate. I'll talk to you soon.
Catch you then. Thanks, John.
You've been listening to Master Dealmaker Secrets with John Blake. Subscribe to get more in-depth strategies and maximize your sales process with new episodes every other week. And double your inquiry to sale conversion with the lead flow you already have. Go to johnblakeaudio.com for his exclusive, free, no fluff audio training and companion PDF guide.